we're here to make a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's August 28th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Niall Song. Good morning. Good morning. And Jessica Dine Hong.
I'm in the good mood today.
You are in a good mood today, as your shirt says.
Good mood today.
Happy Monday to you both. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Last week, Donald Trump became the first former U.S. president to ever have a mugshot taken. Caught up in charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election, Trump had his mugshot taken last Thursday. The Georgia courthouse soon posted Trump's mugshot, which went viral. His supporters and campaign managers have actually used the photo to make merch to sell, like shot glasses, mugs, t-shirts, and even bobblehead dolls. Moving on, we're now on day 5 since Japan has been releasing treated wastewater from its wrecked Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Though the IAEA is regularly informing neighboring countries on how the wastewater is being discharged and checking if it's safe, a lot of people are still very concerned, including parents in Korea. They're worried that their children might have seafood following the discharge as part of their lunch meal, and the Education Ministry said they have and will continue to only use safe seafood as ingredients. Officials stressed how they've never once used seafood directly imported from Japan since March of 2021. And staying with local news in Korea, the country will soon change the color of license plates on corporate cars from white to green. And that is to prevent business owners from buying extremely expensive cars and not paying full tax when they're not solely using them for corporate purposes. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport is thinking of introducing this measure as early as September. And we've seen a surge in the number of people in Korea who bought luxury cars with huge price tags over the past few years. 8 out of 10 who bought cars worth more than $324,000 used corporate names. But this has stirred a lot of public debate as to whether this was fair. Those who are supporting the green license plate measures said it isn't fair to see the family members of business owners get away with so many advantages, namely taking advantage of corporate tax benefits and cost reductions when not even using these cars for business-related meetings or purposes. And a public survey conducted by the Transport Ministry found that 84% of respondents were for this type of new license plate measure for corporate vehicles. Now, I'd like to expand this news feed here to the studio. What do you think about that, Cheska?
You know, I'm always against people who, enjoy luxury for their own purposes. However, if I may point out something that I noticed very interesting about my personal anecdote when I first came to Korea. So as you know, I've lived in some of the most metropolitan cities like New York and LA, and I've seen more luxury cars in Seoul, South Korea, my first month living here than I ever did anywhere else.
Right.
So it just, just random brand cars parked in like a one-room apartments. And so again, I'm not against it, but I think it's very important that we have these rules and regulations that sort of make sure that the resources are allocated for better use rather than just personally used to avoid taxes, or for people who are not in business using this law to enjoy something that is probably not for them.
Right. I think the central issue, as you mentioned, was it's not for them. So people are enraged that people that aren't actually using them for business purposes, but just for the flex, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what's enraging the public. But why? Now, why do you think so many people are then supporting this type of measure?
Yeah, I think it's because so many people are actually taking advantage of this system, which was actually supposed to help businesses, buy different types of cars if they needed it. While I do understand the love of luxury cars, I really think you should buy them when you can pay the taxes that are due in your name. A lot of younger people who have connections with these businesses, maybe family members, could get the cars, and like you were mentioning in the VCR, the benefits of the company and the tax reduction, and I really don't think that's fair, or it serves the purpose of luxury brand. I think the whole point of luxury brand is that you want to show your class, but if you're going around trying to avoid those taxes to
really
show off your money or maybe connections, I really don't think that's it's not very
Right.
attractive.
And there's still a lot more negotiation that needs to be done. Officials have mentioned how it will be hard to change all the license plates on corporate cars out there, given that there's so many. And that's why some experts are worried that this could also be unfair for business owners who recently bought a car or will buy one once the measure passes, because they would most likely use a green license plate while other corporate owners don't change their plates. So we'll definitely have to see how this measure is elaborated in a future public hearing. As for now, that was our news feed for this Monday. Let's now head into our main discussion topic of the day. And the central question we'd like to ask you guys today is, are you happy? And not too many in Korea seem to be. And take a look at the screen to find out why. 35%. That's the amount of Koreans who said they were happy with their lives here in Korea. According to a Public Health Weekly report from the KDCA back in July, only 35% of Koreans said they were happy. The report asked people to rate their happiness on a scale of 0 to 10. The average stood at just 6.68. What about you guys? Are you happy? And this is a question you can think about throughout today's episode. In the meantime, now, why don't you walk us through the latest happiness index for South Koreans?
Yeah, I'm Korean and I feel generally quite happy, but it seems that many others don't necessarily agree. Let's take a look at this graph that I prepared. According to a survey by the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, only 34.7% of the people feel happy. And I actually recently read in another report by the UN that out of 10, the average Korean answered that their happiness rate was at 5.935, just below 6th. And this was averaging between 2019 to 2021. And this actually makes us 59th out of 146 countries that were surveyed. And to look at our surrounding nations, it's Japan, and they scored 6.39, a little ahead of us, and China was at 5.58. To me, none of these numbers seem to be okay to be an average. It just feels like they're missing a certain aspect of their lives. They're wanting something more. And it's interesting because Korea is quite high in GDP and their life expectancy, but very low when it comes to other areas like happiness. And just for the reference, the highest was Finland. Not surprising, the Finns always do really well, and they scored 7.8 on the scale.
7.8. You know, it's an average, but I thought it'd be like a 9 for Finland.
Well, it's always an average. So
yeah, I
there's
guess there are a
probably
lot of people
who are a lot lower.
Yeah, so now I'd like to use this time to find out how happy you guys are. So why don't we try our own happiness index here in the studio? As you guys represent a lot of millennials and Gen Z out there, let's take out our sketchbooks and write down how happy we are on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being happiest, 1 being, you know, not too happy. So I'm going to write mine down. Okay.
Defy the gravity.
I chose my number. Did you guys write it down?
Yes.
Okay, once Cheska's done, let's flip our sketchboards. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So wait,
Oh, wow!
8.3 to, okay, wait, let's start with Cheska. Very specific numbers right there.
Yes.
But 8.3 to 8.7. Wait, what's with the decimal point?
I could have gone 2 more decimal points, but I thought it would be 2 extra.
What does that mean?
So, okay, for me, I actually am I love that you guys have such high numbers because I think happiness is contagious.
It is.
I think these 9s just bumped my 8.3 to about 8.8. But for me, what I do with my happiness is I'm generally, I kind of see happiness as a verb. So it's not a state where I kind of remain in it. So every time I do something that happy, I am in a happy sort of state almost. So for me, I purposely make sure that throughout the day, I'm around 8.3 and 8.7, even though I'm feeling like 15 and 20, because that motivates me to constantly, every day, sort of go off.
Pursue more happiness.
Exactly.
That's a really nice way of thinking. For me, I chose 9, and now you and I are 9. We're twinsies right now.
Yeah.
And that's only because I am really happy. And you know what's making me even more happy is the fact that amongst our panels here, we just bumped up the average really high. We started from 5 in Korea, but now we're like, what, 8 point something.
Yes.
What about you now? Why are you on
Yeah, I'm also at a good 9 or 10. I think what Cheska was saying, it made me think a little bit that she's always striving to make it kind of lower so that she can be better.
Right.
I feel like this makes me really comfortable, and a lot of times I don't want to do that. I don't want to strive for that, but I feel at peace. I don't want to be constantly moving to keep this at a 9, but I really think it goes from 9 to even up almost like 9.5.
Wow.
Some days 10, and I really think it's because I have almost everything that I could need and want, and I understand that that's a privilege, but I'm so thankful for it. Yeah.
And what you need and want being like basic necessities, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's really hard and easy at the same time, but it's having a roof over your head, having food to eat, having really great food to eat here in Korea.
Yes.
I'm so happy to be living in Korea. You know, having friends, having family that you love. I really think that, you know, that's really what makes up most of my happiness.
And happiness is so subjective because even the criteria we use to define happiness could differ per person. Some people might be talking about economic needs and basic necessities, while others could be talking about interpersonal relations with different people out there.
And it's also important what kind of people you surround yourself with, right?
Exactly.
Because no matter how hard you're trying to remain positive or happy, if you're surrounded by people who are not aligned with how you're feeling or how you're striving to make your life, then you're kind of using your energy to sort of defend yourself, like defend your happiness, which then you're using all your energy just to remain sort of neutral or barely happy.
And mind you, for me, when I define happiness, I do it on a daily basis. For instance, one day I could rate myself out of 1 to 10 being a 9, but one day I could feel like a 7. You know, I think it changes because it's your mood too, and it changes on the situation you're in every day. But we also asked our viewers the same question, and here's how they evaluated their own happiness state. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. So Barisha Consumer says, out of a scale from 1 to 10, she gave herself a 7 or 8. I'm able to live on my own, buy most things I want within reason, save money, and my job is pretty ideal for the time being. Mary Jane said an 8. Even though life is far from perfect, I'm dealing with aging, lost my much-loved husband 3 years ago, but I can choose happiness when I focus on my common daily blessings. Flagger said, with all the bad news and financial worries, usually a 5 or 6, but every now and then my extended family, especially my nieces, send me a cheerful message on the messenger app Kakao Talk about something good, like a new recipe, as they learn to cook or when they pass an exam. Then it becomes an 11 plus.
Oh,
so sweet. Nice. And
family.
I know, family. And you can see all of our viewers provided different angles to how they define happiness. It could come on a daily basis, or it could come from even small messages that you receive from your nieces. That's really heartwarming. But just by looking at the figures given by our viewers, we could tell that their level of happiness is much higher than the average Korean is, according to the index that you introduced, Nell. And why do you think Koreans have a lower happiness index compared to others around the world?
So there was a discussion amongst the writers and the producers about this topic, and a lot of them believe that money is actually very directly correlated with happiness here in Korea. And yes, I do understand the financial need, and you know what I mentioned earlier, the roof over your head and food is equated to money at some point, but I think it's kind of relative to the person next to you. So there's a lot of comparison, not just, you know, with money, but in school. So you're always thinking, oh, you know, I got a 98 on a test, but there's 15 kids who are better than me, so it's
about like 99 or 100.
Right, so it's like the lack of satisfaction with where you are as an individual. It's like being graded on a curve, kind of, and I think that kind of makes you a little bit anxious to constantly chase somebody else. It's not your own goals.
Hyper competition.
Yeah,
We've been seeing that since we were young, based on the
not just in
side.
education, but also in finances, what kind of job you get, and I really think that's tiring for me, so I don't do that personally. And I think that's why I'm happy.
But that's a good point. I think the hyper competitiveness that's deeply rooted in society, whether that be from elementary school, but even after you graduate from college, people, as you mentioned, they compare where you are in your life in terms of your career. And that's a good point that we should be focusing on. But what about you, Cheska? How would you like to answer the question as to why Koreans have a relatively low happiness index compared to others in the world?
I think I can answer that on 2 folds. I think the first one is, as Niall so beautifully mentioned, I think it's the comparison. So our generation has the highest depression rate, and on the stat it says only 1.4% of youngsters are free from social media. So basically more than 98% of children are on this, constantly being bombarded with contents that are probably not filtered, that are probably showing probably the highlights of everyone around them.
Right.
And you know, to make a person miserable, all you have to do is put someone who's better than you and throw a few comments, and your day could just go from the best to the worst in like a split of seconds, right?
Yeah.
But just to imagine, we are constantly seeing that like 24 hours of the day. How are we supposed to maintain a certain level of satisfaction or contentment? The other thing is, now you mentioned the UN report, and there is something called the misery index also, along with the happiness index. Now, the happiness index apparently is a personal thing, like you're striving to maintain yourself at a certain level. But misery index is from outside sources, so how safe you feel in an environment, how the society protects you, how the government functions to give you the opportunity. And I think Korean society, as you mentioned, is extremely competitive. So no matter how hard you're trying to be happy, probably the misery index is also at a certain high level.
That's such a compelling point, though, because I think misery and happiness, though very ironic, it goes hand in hand.
It does. It's almost like it negates what you're trying to do to be happy.
Exactly. But as you mentioned, happiness comes from within. It's more personal, so we can control it, hopefully. But misery, we can't.
Exactly.
But we should be in like a less miserable situation to feel happy. So we'll have to find out how this can work. And in order to do that, let's now add a psychology expert in our talks to add on to our analysis. We're going to include a professor of psychology at Amherst College in our talks. It's Professor Catherine Sanderson, who specializes in health and development. She regularly speaks on topics like the science of happiness and the power of emotional intelligence. And today, she'll elaborate on the psychology of happiness and the power it has. Welcome, Professor Sanderson.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this invitation to talk. I've so enjoyed learning that all three of you are very happy. Congratulations.
Yes, we are.
We try.
All right, Professor Sanderson, I'd like to ask you the first question. Let's start off by defining happiness. It seems to be so subjective, and the index measurement seems to be subjective as well. So speaking from a psychology expert's perspective, how would humans know that they're happy, and is the current measurement out there accurately depicting that?
So it's a wonderful question. And in all honesty, in the literature, there's a fair amount of conflict about answering that question. That some people believe you should think about happiness in terms of how the happiness index measures it. So things like, what is life expectancy? What is the gross domestic product? Is there corruption? Are people free to make their own life choices? Is there generosity in the community? Sort of a combination of these. Other people think it should be much more about life satisfaction, contentment. If I could live my life over again, I'd do about what I'm doing now. And still other people think it's really about positive emotion, affect, feelings of joy, engagement, excitement. So frankly, there's not a single definition, and that's one of the things that's actually very challenging.
Yeah.
And Professor Sanderson, I'd like to ask you a second question. We talked about the difference of different countries in the happiness index. So which one is the highest right now, and what is the secret behind their level of happiness?
Well, as you all gathered, Finland is once again in the first position. And Finland, I think it's the 6th year in a row that Finland has been number one. And a lot of other countries that are very high as well are also the Scandinavian countries. So like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, those countries tend to be consistently pretty high. Some of the explanations for that are that they tend to have pretty good health care. They have large life expectancy. People live to be pretty old in terms of age. They also have good education. And they also seem to be countries that really value work-life balance. I heard your conversation before, and I think that is really one of the biggest issues that might separate some countries like Finland and Norway and Sweden from, frankly, Korea and the United States.
Right.
There's a joke that went around on social media that I actually posted on my Instagram in December, and it was the difference between somebody going on vacation in Germany and the United States. And in Germany, the out of office message said, I'm on vacation for the next 2 months. If it's important, email me, in September or something like that. And in the United States, the out of office message said, I'm having kidney surgery this morning, but I shouldn't be unavailable for more than 2 hours.
Oh my
gosh. Isn't that so the example, right? And I imagine that you would say Korea might be more like the United States perspective, right? I'm just 2 hours off of work to have that surgery.
Right. And Professor Sanderson, you actually mentioned the perfect segue to the question that I'm about to ask. So I think it's just as important, according to the UN report, that this right to be happy sort of work with this right to be not miserable. And this misery index, I think, has to do a lot with the society and culture, and not having to post that you have a kidney surgery just to take a few breaths of air. So what do you think is the role of the society and the government to ensure that we are happy?
Right. I love that question. And I think part of it really gets into this idea of what is prioritized in a given culture, right? Is it just how much money you make or how many hours that you work or what are your grades if you're a teenager or a college student? And instead saying we actually really value people taking time off, people doing nothing, or people just walking around in nature. So I think part of it basically is what a society says they want. One of you, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which one, I was listening carefully, said something that I think perfectly illustrates a key finding in the literature. And that's a famous quote by a former United States President, Teddy Roosevelt, which is, comparison is the thief of joy.
That is so true.
Wow.
And I think that idea of comparison, do I make as much as this person? Right. Am I as attractive as this person? And that also feeds into, of course, what we know about social media and its influence.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Sanderson. It was a pleasure to be talking to you today. And hopefully one takeaway that we can get is stop comparing each other. Yeah. Stop comparing ourselves.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Now, aside from comparing ourselves to many brilliant people out there on social media or people we meet on a daily basis, how would you guys like to pursue happiness? And give us a few tips. I mean, we have a high happiness.
Oh, yes.
So
we have a 9 and a
we have a 9 and 8.3 to 8.7. So why don't we share a few tips on how we as individuals can pursue happiness?
Love
with
it.
you now.
Yeah, I think for me is being thankful for what you already do have. And yeah, you can always want more things and pursue that as well, but always looking back and thanking your God or thanking the universe, whichever one you believe, and just being grateful for that is such a big thing. And I think finding genuine joy, like we were talking about, in relationships and self-improvement and things that you can control rather than the outside factor of the misery that we were talking about. And I think Cheska was talking about people who play into that. You have the choice to cut that out or bring more people in, and controlling that is something that you can do. And I think that really plays a huge role.
Have more ownership in your life.
Yeah.
All right. What about you, Cheska?
I think one of the things that actually helped me sort of become quote unquote happier, and I would like to leave a food of thought for everyone who's watching, is that once I sort of channeled my perspective from happy being an emotional state to a verb, my perspective completely changed. Meaning it's not a state, like an emotional state you have to constantly maintain. Like every time you do something, it is happy. So you're doing happy rather than, oh, I am happy. Because when you keep saying it's a state of happiness, it's almost like you're losing out when you're not happy. But you can't be constantly happy because that's just neutral. That's a flat line. It's like a heartbeat. You're dead. So knowing that, oh, every time I dip, I can do happy to raise it up. Do happy.
Yeah.
I think that completely changed my perspective.
Love that.
And speaking of comparison, I think there's a difference between motivation and just empty stimulation. So let's be a little bit wise and filter that.
In order to do happy.
Do happy.
Now, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Nell Song.
Let's do happy.
Let's do happy. And Cheska Dino.
We're in good mood today.
Let's be in a good mood today. All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.